Hello, everyone. Welcome again to one of GeneXus webinars. How can business process automation help your company today? By Juan Mendoza, Wilmer Guerrero, and Fabian Viña. Juan Mendoza is founder and president of Ocean Systems, Inc., is a developer and provider of software solutions to financial institutions. The company specializes in electronic funds transfer and compliance applications with installations both domestic in Latin America and in Europe. As president, he oversees the direction of the company and supervises the areas of product development and technical fulfillment of non-standard turnkey installations. Wilmer Guerrero has over 15 years of banking experience and over 10 years of direct BSA, AML, and sanctions management in domestic retail banks and international private banking. Fabian Viña, he works for Ocean Systems since 2002. He is the creator and developer of enhanced compliance solutions. He has been developing software with GeneXus and GXFlow since 2002. More than 20 years of experience in JavaScript, Delphi, .NET, and SQL Server. At this time, I now present to you Juan Mendoza.
Well, thank you everyone for taking time a little bit of time this afternoon as we try to shed some light in how technology is used to fight anti-money laundering and fraud. I'm going to begin with just some brief slides regarding our story in the compliance space, and then I'll hand over control to Wilmer, who will be talking more about the challenges that financial institutions face every day to fight money laundering and corruption. Our company's been around for almost 30 years. It's headquartered in Miami, Florida. Currently, Miami is the epicenter of COVID in the world, but when AML monitoring systems began, Miami was known as the epicenter for money laundering in the United States. So how we started was that our customers pretty much pushed us into the space. As a result, we were fortunate to be one of the early adopters of this technology. Oops, sorry about that. We began with our compliance products about 20 years ago due to the demand that our customers were putting on us. And we started with ECS, which at that time provided the Know Your Customer and the transaction monitoring, and the OFAC server. These are the two primary products. These two products, if you had a good system that would upkeep and maintain your Know Your Customer information, and were able to do transaction monitoring, and you were able to do sanction screening on your customers and on your transactions, you were well ahead of the game. But as the market evolved, regulators got tougher, and requirements were escalated. We found out certain things. We realized that we needed more products. For example, we realized that wherever we went, the customers would calculate the risk of their customers using spreadsheets or some other ad hoc methodology. And risk is at the cornerstone. Risk is a very important factor. Risk is the cornerstone of compliance. It's the one that dictates how to monitor a customer, how often should you do a due diligence on them. So as the regulators got tougher and tougher, and the banks were less confident with the risk that they had assessed, they would start making every one of their customers that belong to a certain country or belong to a certain industry as high risk. And this caused a lot of problems because obviously a high risk customer is a lot more costly to maintain. It requires a lot more analysis. So we came up with Prevent. Prevent, what it does is it systematically is able to, using risk matrices that is based on certain factors that you select, certain risk factors and criteria, you're able to do a deep dive into the profile of a customer, and that granularity that it provides allow our customers to assign not only to assign the proper risk, but also to lower the number of high-risk customers, and in essence, lower the workload. So this is just one example of why we were driven to create yet another product. In the same way with the on-deck and certified products, we realized that the information that was required in order to do good compliance was not available anywhere. The central core systems for years were built to maintain financial information, accounting information, perhaps beneficiary information, but they didn't have information such as do you handle cash on premises? Are the owners related to a politically exposed person? And these are the types of information that became necessary in order to do a proper risk analysis. So we needed products like On Deck to onboard customers and capture this information and augment the information that was not being maintained by the central systems. And also in the case of Certify, which we use to annually or periodically review your high-risk customers. So in essence, the takeaway here is that the sophistication and the market expectations in this market, in this space has been exponential since we started, and we have been very, very busy in order to keep ahead of the game. Currently, our customers run the gamut in size and demographics. As you can see from the slide there are some banks that are 20 billion in assets with multiple locations. And we have other customers that are less in size, but yet they all have one thing in common: they do have a lot of international activity. So what that costs us a lot of challenges. So before we go into the compliance aspect, I wanted to just give you an idea of some of the challenges that we came across when we started. First, we need to be able to adapt to both large and small banks. Some of our customers have compliance departments exceeding 80 persons in multiple levels, and other customers are just a 2-person show. So the procedures to systematically control the procedures of these compliance departments vary widely. So that was something that was needed in our solution. Second, we need to allow compliance analysts to quickly and easily retrieve information in a holistic way. Prior to the advent of these systems, compliance would need to go through a patchwork of different systems and obtain piecemeal the information that they needed. Third, the information most of the time comes from different sources. So the logistics to automatically load and be in sync with the different systems on a daily basis, and have everything ready to go following the morning, then before the next day starts, is a project in itself. Fourth, data is not available, and so we must have the ability to capture information that doesn't exist anywhere else and include it into our knowledge base in order to be able to provide the analysts with the entire picture. And fifth, in most of the times, we install a product enterprise-wide. In the early days, the systems would have the compliance department to work in a silo. They would do their work and nobody would know what they were doing. But more than often, it has happened, it has been proven that the relationship managers, the account officers, those with first-hand knowledge of the customers, their participation is extremely valuable, and it's been proven so. So the ability to reach out from compliance, reach out to these people, have them participate and record their findings and keep this information recorded in the system for further review in years to come is really important. So the ability to be able to install a product enterprise-wide was another technology challenge that we had to comply with. I'm just going to do this last one slide regarding the type of integration that we're faced with on a typical implementation. As you can see, information is coming from everywhere. We have the core banking system, where the central information, that's the main driver for all the information. And then we have other systems. We have payment systems that have the details of all the transactions. We have check files that come in and have the true deposit picture of a batch of checks that are deposited. And then we also have information from the internet, such as articles, videos, and so forth that need to be put into our database. This is very important so that, again, the holistic view of the customer needs to be available and easily accessible. So this integration is a key part. It's one of the challenges. And I just wanted to leave you with that takeaway before we actually got into the compliance aspect. So with that, I'm going to now go ahead and have Wilmer take over and go over the compliance.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
If you bear with me for a second. All right, thank you everyone for joining. One of the things that we want to discuss today was what are the main challenges that the compliance and BSA departments are facing today in this environment, right? So we came up with 5 main issues, and I want to discuss them with you. If we start today, I want to start with the main issue that most of the compliance departments are facing, and that is resourcing. You know, having a compliance team fully staffed and with a system that really is able to capture and put controls in place to mitigate possible money laundering and terrorist financing, right? Recent studies and the most recent FinCEN advisory in regards to how much money our institution is spending on filing CTRs and conducting investigations. It says that approximately $205 million on every year are spent by financial institutions in just filing suspicious activity reports. In addition to that, you have banks, larger financial institutions, that they spend over $1 billion on an annual basis just on a compliance program. And what are the main issues here, right? So for the larger institutions is the multiple data sets that you have and multiple systems that are being used to really put in place a good compliance program. So you have your transactional monitoring in one place, you have your investigations being conducted outside the transactional monitoring system, you have your onboarding that is a different process and is usually managed by the business. on the commercial teams, you have your OFAC screening and sanction screening being done in a different place. So what Ocean System has done is put everything combined in one system that can capture all those processes at once. You have a team, BSA analyst, that today is spending most of the time trying to compiling data, right? Getting data and reports from your core system, from different sources, to then analyze the information and provide a review, either a high risk review or an alert. So the idea is that the analysts are spending more time today in compiling data than actually analyzing the customer transactional behavior and identifying any possible money laundering or terrorist financing, right? So what can be done to minimize and to really utilize your resources the most effective way? So the idea is to really have your team using the solution, the transaction monitoring solution, in a way that they can spend most of the time in analyzing the data, not compiling the data. Like I mentioned before, the key components of a strong BSA program or compliance AML program is to have everything centralized. You have your onboarding process that fits your transaction monitoring system, a system that can actually rate your customers from the onboarding process, right, towards the life cycle of that customer. A customer may be onboarded today as a low risk customer, but based on the transactional activity, based on cases, on investigations, on negative media that have been that are coming up as during the cycle of your customer, then that customer risk is going to be changing, right? So a customer risk could be an inherent risk, a one-time risk at onboarding, but a good AML program has a risk that is always changing. As your customer behavior changes, as the transaction changes, then your customer risk should be changing as well, right? Then you have a transaction monitoring that should focus mainly on the 132 flags that the FFIC manual has put together to identify possible money laundering and terrorist financing, right? You have your transaction screening, and this is pivotal. Sometimes most of the complaints that the compliance department usually gets from the commercial teams is how many times we ask the same questions for the same transaction, right? So when you have a system that allows you to attach the supporting documentation that has been compiled during the screening of a transaction, right? So you have a transaction that was part of an alert during the office screening, and you request a supporting documentation. So what happens with that supporting documentation today? Most banks, what they're doing, they place it in a folder in the shared drive, right? So if that transaction later on alerts for transaction monitoring because of an investigation, because of high risk review, then that transaction gets questioned one more time and the questions are sent to the account officers. So if you can centralize that in a system that at the time of investigation, at the time of a transaction monitoring review, at the time of the alert, you can see that transaction has already been questioned and they have supporting documentation. That eliminates the time of going back now to the account officer and question that same transaction again, right? You eliminate silos in the process, and you are eliminating upsetting your account officers and eventually your customers that are being asked the same questions over and over. As well, one of the things that is pivotal is how much time is spent on the high risk reviews. I can speak as part of my own experience with my teams. when at the time of the high risk reviews or the EDD reviews, the enhanced due diligence reviews that we were doing for high risk customers, we were spending a whole day just doing negative media searches on our customers and the counterparties. So it would be great, right, to have a solution where at the time of completing your reviews, that search is already done for you, right? So that's one of the things that we have built into ECS and Certified, is that Google searches and of a screening, a PEP screening, can be done automatically at the time of the review. So you don't need to go outside to do it. The system automatically will do it for you and give you the results. So the analysts really are spending time on reviewing those results and making a final decision if the negative media has any impact on your customer, right? Then you also need to have a system where at the time of a transaction, if the transactions is determined to be unusual for your customer, if it presents a risk, if it's suspicious, that from that point on, you can initiate your investigation. And we have done that by creating case management. So from the alert or on demand, you can create a case, and the case becomes a whole cycle itself, right? You have your case, you complete your investigation, you review the transactional activity, you review the counterparties, the supporting documentation, invoices, and so on, and then you make a disposition if that transaction, if that alert, if that case is reportable, right? If you need to report it to the authorities. In the case of the US, you need to complete your SAR. So the system does that for your for you. You don't have to manually do your investigations. Everything is centralized in case management. And one of the things that case management does, right, is based on roles. So if the users do not have the role for case management, no one else can see that information, and that is done on purpose, right? We don't want to has that sensitive information available for all the users. So only users with that role can actually see the investigation and the outcome of the investigation. And then the regulatory reporting. You have to file your SARs, you have to file your CTRs on a timely manner. The system tracks the days and alerts you when you are due to complete your CTRs or your SARs for that matter. And one of the things that also uh, in today's environment, if you don't do a SAR batch filing, you have to do your manual SARs, and that requires for you to enter information that is already in the system for you. So what have we done? We have automated that process where if you select your subjects for the investigations, the individuals, the system automatically populates those fields in the SAR. If you have added a number of suspicious activity, the system automatically, right, calculates and adds up that amount. So the only thing that you need to focus as part of your review or completing your SAR is on the narrative, which is actual the where you should spend the most time, right? Because the SAR quality is very important when you submit your SARs. Again, I already spoke about the onboarding process. The onboarding process needs to combine multiple things. It needs to obtain information from your core system, information that is only available in your core system, and then information that can come from the customer interview. Usually you see those in a paper form. So if you have a system that can combine all those processes together, whatever you get from core, those addresses, date of birth, information that is required for CIP purposes, and you combine that with the ADD, the additional due diligence needed, or the KYC information, and you put it all together, that's how you build a good onboarding KYC process, right? Also a process that can do the screening as you add individuals into your process. If you add signers, if you add the parties for which your customer is going to be transacting, their suppliers, and you can do screening automatically on those names, right? On either your counterparties for PEP screening, for sanction screening, not only OFAC, but other type of sanctions, European list, the Bank of England, and so on, and also any Google searches, negative news media searches that needs to be done. You can compile all that in one system. So that if you spend and it has been my experience that whole process of onboarding is so important because the account officers, the front line, they want to start building and opening new accounts. But if that process is delayed because you need to do all these searches and reviews manually, uh, you are really impacting the business in bringing new businesses, right? And in augmenting the business size of the bank and the financial institution. So what we have done is put everything together to eliminate silos and really capture all the information that is needed for the onboard of a new customer. Uh, at the same time, one of the things that is important is the time that is spent reaching out to the account officers when we have questions and additional questions. There's a transaction that does not make sense for what we know about this customer. You need to reach out to the account officers to question and to get more information. So what we have seen is that usually that is done outside the transaction monitoring system, and then all tracking of those pending questions are done outside the system. So what we have seen and we provide is a solution where you can send the question directly from the system to the account officers. They will get an alert letting them know that they have questions are needing more information, and they can enter that information into the system and it's sent back to you, and you can track how long it took for those questions or for those items to be responded by the account officer. So it's a great mechanism that we have put in place. Also, if you have any documentation, customers that require annual documents, especially for now for the certificate of beneficial ownership, that you may want to get it at the time once a year, or at least any time that there is an event. So you can track all that through one centralized system, right? And then we provide you with business intelligence. What does business intelligence means? You can on demand know how many customers you have that are high risk, what countries are they transacting with, what is the volume of transactions that the customers are doing, and so on. Like I mentioned, the process needs to be integrated to your OFAC and sanction screening, not only your customers, but also your transactions, your wires, your ACHs. They need to be centralized. What I have seen in most financial institutions is that wires are screened in a system, your customers are screened in another solution, and not even to mention letters of credit that usually those are done manually, right? So what we offer and what a good AMO program has to have is a centralized screening solution that allows you to screen your customer, your transactions, your letter of credits all at once. Not only to OFAC, but any published list that we have out there. You have the OFAC, you have the European Union, United Nations, the Bank of England, and so many others. You can also create your own private list, right? And that's something that I have utilized in the past, where I know the customer that I had demarketed, that I have closed, and I don't want to bring those customers ever again into the bank. So we put it into an internal list. So if at any time those customers want to be onboarded one more time, the system will be able to say, no, hey, there's an alert, go to compliance, and compliance need to approve that new customer. Our OFAC sanctions program, and one of the things that really worked for me is that it uses the fuzzy logic and the same algorithm that is currently used by the OFAC website. So if you go to the OFAC website, you are most likely to get very close results or similar results to what you get in the OFAC website to what our system provides. During my model validations, I was able to validate the OFAC system multiple times, even getting better results than other solutions that we were testing. So the number two issue that most compliance department have to face today is how to detect money laundering, terrorist financing, human trafficking, elderly abuse, fraud, tax evasion. Right? Those are the main red flag or main issues that we have. How do we create alerts and flags and rules that can detect money laundering and terrorist financing and human trafficking without making too much noise, right? You don't want to have too many false positives. You don't want to create too many issues. So what ECS does, it allows you to create your flags or your rules and based on conditions, right? Not all your customers are going to behave the same way. So a non-bank financial institution does not behave the same way that an exporter, importer, right? So creating rules based on specific conditions, either customer conditions, account conditions, transaction conditions, is key to a transaction monitoring program, right? Right now, one of the hot topics is elderly abuse and human trafficking. So it's so important that the system that you use today for transaction monitoring allows you to use different conditions so you can actually detect that those possible red flags. For example, for human trafficking and elderly abuse, one of the things that we have heard from our customers, like, we need something not for every customer of mine, but I want to do it based on age range, right? If my customers are from this age range, then I want to look at the behavior. How, is there a lot of cash withdrawn? Is the customer going to different online places to rent for hotels and restaurants, right? So those are the things that the system, a good transaction monitoring system, allows you to do, is to be able to create your own rules based on the bank's risk appetite and risk and the type of customers that you have. Not every single bank have the same type of customers. They don't behave the same way. International private banking customers do not behave the same way that community bank does. A community bank in Miami does not behave the same way that a community bank in South Carolina, right? So that's important, that you have a monitoring system that is flexible enough for you to create your own rules, your own reports. Um, One of the things that, in regards to the transaction monitoring and detecting money laundering, one of the things that I think works a lot is if you go to the FFIEC manual and you get all the red flags, right? And you have, I believe it's like 120 something flags for possible money laundering, and about 16 flags that you can put together for possible terrorist financing, and you put them together in a spreadsheet, and you say, does this flag apply to my bank and to my bank customers, to the customers that I have in this bank? And if it does, what controls can I put in place? And then you can create your own rules. And ECS has different rules already that allows you to do that, but you can also customize your rules. Okay. Moving forward. Another thing that is it has been a hot topic for the last couple of years is the BSA risk, AML risk, and your customer risk, right? So it is important that you know the bank risk. It is important that based on the bank risk, you set your controls in place. A couple of years ago, most bankings were going through the de-risking process, right? If a customer was a high-risk customer, I don't want it out of the door. And eventually those customers will have to go banking somewhere else, right? And that was creating more issues to FinCEN than actually allowing the risk, accepting the risk, and putting the controls in place. But in order for you to do that, right, in order for a financial institution to be able to do that, to accept the risk, they need to have a system that allows them to put controls in place, right? That allows them to understand the risk on an ongoing basis. And I think that is such a key point to have a strong AML program, right? You want to do your risk assessment once a year, twice a year. You set up your own schedule for your risk for the bank risk assessment. And that risk assessment should always work for you on how you are going to risk rate your customers moving forward, right? So if there's a new product that has a higher risk, you need to understand it, and you need to maybe you need to use it in your country, in your customer risk, right? Countries, countries risk. That's something that is constantly changing, and different banks may have a different risk approach for a country, right? So if you are a customer, if you're a financial institution, that your main focus are customers from Venezuela or customers from Mexico, you cannot automatically say that all your customers from Venezuela and all your customers from Mexico are going to be high risk customers just because of the country where they're from, right? And that's something that we have seen in the past, and banks moving away from that, because really you're not mitigating risk. You are not accepting risk. You're just throwing out risk out there, right? So it's important that you do your risk assessment on an annual basis. And like I said, based on your schedule, and based on that risk assessment, you review your risk metrics for your customers. One of the things that is also important is understanding what information you have to build your customer metrics. And you may want to have the nationality as a part of your components for your customer risk metric. But if that field is not populated, or if only you have 10 customer with nationality, what good does it do to you, right? So it is important to understand the information that you have. And ECS, what we have done, we do have a risk data analysis. So it lets you know what fields you can choose from and analyze that data. How much information do I have? How many customers have a country for nationality? How many customers have a country where they register from? Or how many customers have the occupation code or a business code, industry code, right? So that's important to understand that. Otherwise, you're going to have a risk-ready methodology that is not going to be effective. It's not going to be really calculating your customer risk because the data may not be there. One thing also that I want to mention is that when you create your customer risk metrics, are all your customers the same way? Do they present the same risk, right? So does the individual have the same risk that a business? Or an individual from Venezuela have the same risk than an individual in Mexico or an individual in the US? No, they all have different risk, right? And that's important to understand. The same thing with in businesses. Not all the businesses have the same risk. So you can actually create different risk matrices, right? You can create a risk matrix for your non-bank financial institutions, and you can create a risk metric for your picks and so on. Or you can just say, from all my businesses, I'm going to give a different value or give a different weight to those categories, right? So if a customer is a non-bank financial institution or a professional service provider, I'm going to give it more weight, more risk than a customer that is just a simple retail or a restaurant or a hair salon or things like that, right? Then the other things that is important in your risk metrics, and that's a hot topic today, is your PEPs, right? Are all PEPs equal? Do all PEPs present the same risk to the bank, right? And what is the answer? And that comes from the each financial institution doing your risk assessment, right? Are all PEPs equally high risk? Does a PEP that has been at a public position for over 25 years have the same risk than a PEP that is currently in a public position? Or is it a senior PEP more risky than a PEP in a local community in a non-high risk country, right? So all those components, you know, you need to think about that, because that's what building a good customer risk metric is about. Not saying that all customers have the same risk, and allowing the system to use all the information that you have available, right, to calculate that customer risk. And another component that we have added to the customer risk is not only the volume of the transactions, right? Because maybe you have a high risk customer that at the time of onboarding that customer, based on the inherent risk, right? The customer is from Mexico, and I don't know, it was in a high risk industry. But the only thing that customer opened for you was savings account, or he has a small DDA account with a small balance, and that customer at onboarding was high risk, but during the cycle of the relationship, that customer is now moving the money. He writes a check once in a lifetime just to pay their mortgage. So does that customer should continue to be a high risk, right? So if you include transactional volumes into your metrics, that would really recalculate any inherent high risk and apply a risk based not only on the inherent values, but also on the ongoing transaction that customer is conducting through your financial institution. In addition to that, what we have done is include the countries that those customers are transacting with, right? So maybe a customer has transacted $1 million, but all the wire transfers have been done in the US. But then you have another customer that had transaction $1 million in wire transfers, and all the money is coming and going to a high risk jurisdiction. Would those two customers have the same risk, right? So the system should let you risk rate your customers based on all those different components, on all those different criteria, right? Is it very important? And then based on your customer risk rating, you can do that on a monthly basis. You can do it on an annual basis. You set up your own schedule. Based on that risk of that customer, you set your own alerts and your own rules. And it needs to be on a risk-based approach. Am I gonna generate the same alerts for high-risk customers than low-risk customers, right? Does a high-risk customer has the same, with similar behaviors, which will present a higher risk of possible money laundering and terrorist financing, right? So all those things that you need to think about when you create your risk rating methodologies and assess your BSA AML risk for the bank. Moving forward, and I think to me this is one of the key components of a good AML program and compliance program, and that is the data quality. If you have garbage in your data, that's what you're monitoring, right? And it has been my experience that the compliance department somehow ends up being the data quality control of the bank, right? It's usually the BSA department and the compliance AML departments, the first one to identify when something in the bank is not working due to the data issues. So one of the things that you need to put in place is a data control. Who owns the data, specific data in the bank, right? And you need to put management controls in places. If that data is owned by IT, then IT should be responsible to make sure that data is those fields are properly populated. If the data is owned by the commercial team, by finance, by operations, they need to be responsible to ensure that the information is accurate and and can be used. But in addition to that, you need to have controls in place, right? So what ECS does is at any time that there is a new transaction code, anytime that there is a new product type, anytime that there is a new country, the system would alert you and will let you know you have a new code that has not been assigned defined in the system. You need to review it, right? And that is your control. You then go to whoever you need to go, whatever department, to ensure to understand why, right? So it has been my experience that in management control, anytime that the bank wanted to add a new product to the bank, or a new transaction code was going to be used, or a new country was going to be opened for the bank to be do business with, the BSA department, the compliance department, the AML department was involved in approving that, right? But there were always one or two instances where we were not informed. It was, somebody made a rush decision, but I felt comfortable all the time that ECS was going to capture that for me. And it was going to allow me to identify when a new code was being created or mapped, or even a code that really was a mistake, was an entry key, an entry mistake, error, right? The system will let you know, hey, you have a code that we don't know what it is. You need to fix that issue. Another thing with quality and integrity is that, right, the country associated with your customers. Some banks use the ISO codes, some banks use the GEC codes. So it's very important that your transaction monitoring system is able to, regardless of what your source is, that you can understand the country. So what we have done is, like, even if a bank uses a different country code, a GEC code, we can say, okay, this GEC code is the same as this ISO code. So regardless of what country the customer is using, we will be able to say these are the same country codes. Because that's very important when you do transaction monitoring, when you're trying to assess the customer risk and so on. You have core using a different country code. You have your transaction payment solutions using different country codes. So if you can all combine them in your transaction monitoring system, that is always a plus, right? Another thing that is key for the BSA departments is duplicate CIF records. You create multiple records for the same customer, either by mistake, either because you are the large financial institutions, and that individual goes to different places to open accounts, and there's no control in places to understand or identify if that individual has an existing account or has an existing record in the bank. So when you create multiple records for the same customer, you are not monitoring your customer properly, right? You have two customers for customer IDs or accounts for the same customer, and they're being monitored as if they were two different entities, two different individuals. So what have we done? We have a scrubber, right? That you can scrub based on the tax ID number, or you can do it based on the name. And the system will identify when you have a customer with duplicate records. So, and then it will allow you to either say, these two records are the same, I'm going to merge them, or you can always go back to your core and fix it in your core system, right? The other thing that is important is your reconciliation process. And this is key. If you, in order for you to monitor your transactions properly and to have a good transaction monitoring process, you need to ensure that all your transactions are being, mapped or loaded to your transaction monitoring system. So ECS has a process where we obtain the account balances on a daily basis, and we add and subtract the transactions that took place the previous day to the beginning balance of the previous day, and that result needs to go is compared to the new day, right? Beginning balance, and it should be the same. When there's a discrepancy between those two balances, the system would alert you and will let you know that you have a discrepancy. Therefore, there is a transaction that either did not come into your transaction monitoring system, or perhaps is mapped incorrectly in your transaction monitoring system, right? In addition to that, the system every time that the data is processed, it would alert you to let you know that the data has been processed, how many records were processed, how many customers, how many accounts, how many individuals, how many transactions were processed, and you can look at it by transaction code. So you can say, okay, I had $5 million in wires in, and there were about 500 wire transfers for that day, and then you can compare that to your core solution and do your reconciliation process. So there's multiple ways that we allow you to reconcile. It really depends on how the bank does it, especially if you have foreign currencies accounts, that becomes a little bit more difficult. So we allow you to navigate the reconciliation process in a different way in order for you to ensure, to feel comfortable that you are monitoring all the transactions of your customer. Okay. Another issue that you always have is the customer information, making sure that you have financial statements, that you have the documented source of wealth, source of income, uh, um, customer's country, type classifications, that you have multiple type classification. So all that can be managed through reports in ECS through different data quality processes. And all that ends up being part of your annual model validation, right? When you're doing your model validations, when you're doing your testing, that's one of the things that you need to test is your data quality to ensure that the bank and the AML department understands and all the transaction codes that are being used for transaction monitoring, if there's any new transaction code, that you test those transactions, and that you create during the process of data quality controls in place. So by the time that you do your annual model validations and testing, the information is accurate. And then the latest issue that I feel that we get from all the banks that we work with is how do they reduce false positives, right? A good transaction monitoring system captures all the red flags without making too much noise, right? If you have a system that generates 99.99 false positives, then that means that either you need to calibrate your system properly, and that you need to review the flags, the reports, the alerts, the rules that you have created, because too many false positive is just showing that you're just looking at everything, and looking at everything is also not a good way to do your to monitor for possible money laundering and terrorist financing. And why is that? Why not reviewing everything is a good way to do it? Because then you are not spending sufficient time on those real red flags. You have so many flags, you have so many alerts that have been generated by your system that you are not really focusing on the red flags. That's why ECS allows you to calibrate your system. You can do different flags and rules using different conditions. You can obviously do your above and below the line testing, and things like that, right? One of the things that we have noticed now is that back in the days, well, not back in the days, because not too long ago, the main component of know your customer was to know the expected activity for your customer. And what ended up being is that your customers were deviating from what they mentioned during the onboarding process, right? So again, most customers not really know how many checks they write on a monthly basis, how many wires they send, um, how many ACHs they receive, right? They have an idea, but they really don't know. And what happens is that then you force the commercial teams to start putting information there that perhaps is not that relevant to your customer, right? So what we have seen is a trend of instead of analyzing data based on what your customer said that they were going to do on the expected activity, on the transactional activity, is looking how that customer has been behaving in the 12 months, in 6 months, right? So you create a big customer behavior analysis. This customer uses wire transfers all the time, right? And we review it and everything is fine. But suddenly they start doing wire transfers and now they are using cash. So the system should alert you when they do that. But what happens if the customer told you at onboarding that they were going to do $25,000 in cash every month and $50,000 in wire transfers every month, right? And they never did. And then one day they do it. The system is not going to capture it because they're saying, hey, my customer said that they are good to go with $25,000 cash on an average monthly basis. So a good system would say, no, that's not how the customer has behaved. This customer for the last 12 months, for the last 6 months, had not had any cash activity, and now suddenly is changing behavior. And the system would trigger an alert and let you know that your customer is changing behaviors. And that is a good transaction monitoring system, a good system that allows you to look at your customer behavior and based on any change of patterns, alert you that there was a change of pattern, right? Another thing that is important, and we're working on artificial intelligence, is at the time of reviewing an alert, given a true disposition. Disposition could be this transaction is not a true match, or not a true, is a false positive, or is a false positive, but I needed to have additional questions in order to determine that it was a false positive, or this is a real red flag, right? So what we have done is that we have built in a disposition process where based on that disposition, the system would eventually learn your customer behavior, your customer transactions, your customer flags, and determine if those flags in the future, if that same transaction in the future should be generating a red flag. I think artificial intelligence is the future of everything that we do. I remember that when I was in the financial sector, my concern or the concern of my team was always asking me, is artificial intelligence going to replace me, right? Is going to replace my job? And I always said, no, artificial intelligence is not going to replace the analyst. Artificial intelligence or augmented intelligence is going to compensate the review of the analyst. So the analyst can actually spend time dedicating time to review real red flags, real transactions that are subject to or possible money laundering, terrorist financing, human trafficking, elderly abuse, or tax evasion. And I think with that, I would end my presentation, and I would introduce now Fabian Wigner, who will take this presentation to the more technological aspect of our presentation.
All right. Our solution with GeneXus and GeFlow. In 2002, we started looking for a workflow tool that could adapt to our necessities, that will be fast and easy. And we found GeFlow. The initial plan was to develop a product using native language, and we use workflow tool to only route the alert and the processes. But discovering GeneXus opened new doors in development. The flexibility to GeneXus and GeFlow allow us to grow and adapt our product to cover the necessities and requests to our customer quick and cost efficiently. We start with GeneXus 7.5, and we went through several migrations using GeneXus 9, Evolution 1, all in Java. And now we are currently using GeneXus 16 with .NET. We still have the same code back then. That is amazing. Role restriction and workflow. The financial institution customer data is extremely sensitive and requires detailed security measures. Each user profile should be restricted to the least required access. Roles and restrictions from GeFlow allow each user to be set up with the correct right to access the information and with a permissible action. The versatility to create workflow lets us to cover every aspect, define solution, assign the correct user workflow process, currently we have around 90 different workflows. We have workflow to respond flags, profile exception, field SR, approval information, etc., based on roles and restrictions. They will build over time. Anti-money laundering rules. We launched to the market with 4 fixed rules to identify money laundering. Through the years, the fixed rule became flexible, a new rule was added. Today, we have a wide range of rules both for money laundering and real-time fraud, each with different variation and parameters. To name some: velocity, structuring, average daily activity, country mismatch, multiplex originator beneficiary, etc. The people are creative trying to avoid the law. Every day, they create new ways to wash money, and we are here to detect that movement. Fuzzy Logic Search Engine. The Financial Crime Enforcement Network, FinCEN, required that all transactions and customers be screened against sanction lists such as OFAC and others, and also scan every 2 weeks the list of names that with the intention to locate account and transaction of persons that might be involved in terrorism or money laundering. To address this, we create a Fuzzy Logic search engine to scan all bank customer and all originator beneficiary name, including in the transactions. The search is based in Lucene and use Yarrow Winkler to provide a similarity score on each find. The lists include person name and business name involved in some illegal activity. Also, the financial institution can scan their own block list. In the near future, we are content improvement. There are 2 drivers that constantly push for new functionality. 1, new compliance regulation in different countries where we have customers. And 2, feedback from our customers, regulators, and auditors. Our wishlist submission feature allows our customer to request new features and enhance existing ones. Through the years, this has been the primary source of improvement. The versatility demand this kind of product never stops, and we continue improving this tool to stay ahead in the market. Multi-language. We are in expansion. We want to reach different markets around the world. ECS will be available in different languages. Currently, the system is in English, and we are working on Spanish and Portuguese. Having the product in English, Spanish, and Portuguese will cover a broad spectrum, and maybe we will need more. And the last, artificial intelligence. The world is moving into artificial intelligence. We see it every day more and more in our life. The complex world of money laundering requires us to not only analyze transactions, but also expand the analysis to recognize patterns related to the parties, countries, business type involved in the operation, while at the same time reduce the numbers of alerts. We are currently working with GeneXus Uruguay to add this functionality. Anti-money laundering with artificial intelligence is the future, and we are going there. Now, question. I'm going too fast to try to finish on time, but only 4 minutes will pass. Okay, any questions?
Let me pull it up. So there's a question from Nabel. I will read it out, and Fabian, Wilmer, or Juan, you can take turns in responding it. So it says, you mentioned something about terrorist financing, and this is the prerogative of security and general intelligence for every country, and follows general international security instructions. And the bank has no responsibility for it other than providing documents to the government. Likewise, the bank should follow the special instructions issued by the state government for any bank customer on suspicion. Thanks, Nabil, for your, I don't know if a comment so much as a question. I don't know if Wilmer, Juan, or Fabiano would like to comment on Nabil's words.
in the financial sector, we do have a responsibility, right, to report any suspicious activity that may be related to terrorist financing, especially after September 11. So one of the things that happens after September 11, before it was mainly anti-money laundering issues. After September 11, banks are required to report any suspicious activity that they may think may be related to terrorist financing. So it is a huge component of the AML compliance programs, and the FFIEC manual actually has a list of flags that the banks, the financial institutions, should be looking for during the transaction monitoring process.
Thank you, Wilmer, and thank you, Nabil, again. Let's see if we have any other questions from the audience. Remember, you can drop your questions on the chat on your right. Let's wait a couple of minutes to see if anyone wants to ask our presenters today anything. So we have another message from Nabil. And it goes, now in smart countries, the bank does not need the customer's information, only what the customer's ID card needs, and that is connected to the bank. In addition, all banking operations through the internet or the private machine of banks using artificial intelligence have become such that the focus has become on security. I don't know, guys, if you want to add anything.
A question, but I agree with that comment. So especially for online banking, for customers, for financial institutions that do the whole process through an online process, yes, it is very true that especially now with the European Union, that they have like a global registry for financial for companies to be registered and provide that information, and that is very true. However, the banks are always responsible not only to obtain the CIP requirements, of which is that the information on the ID cards and know your customers, but also to understand your customer and the source of wealth, the source of income, which is information that is not part of this registry. That's questions that you need to compile by asking those questions to your customers. So you need to have always a centralized place that can capture those things, that the customer ID cards and so on, and those questions that are asked on your customers, right? So that's why what ECS is doing is compiling those two components of the onboarding of a new customer, information coming from the ID card, right, which is the CIP requirements, name, address, social security number, ID number, and picture ID, but also know your customer questions. Who you do business with, what is what is your source of wealth, your source of income. All that also needs to be put together. At least in the US, right, it's part of the due diligence process.
Thank you, Wilmer. We have another question, this time from Mario. How are you, Mario? Good to see you attending our webinars. Mario asked, please, could you explain more about the use and how you implement GeneXus workflow to your product? A bit of GeneXus technical question there.
The process that for example, for approval, we have different stages in GeneXus. Each stage has different roles assigned, and we can route the alert state by state using GeneXus and go to the whole process for approval, for example. And also, when multiple alerts are generated, the restriction from GeneXus allowed only to the specific user have access to see or approve or deny or review the alert based on that information. All our system is based basically on roles and restrictions from GeneXus.
Great. Thank you for that, Fabian. Okay, I think we don't have any other questions from the audience. So I would like to thank Juan, Wilmer, and Fabian for the excellent presentation. Thanks to everyone for taking part. Now we are posting, as you see, a questionnaire, a poll that we would be honored if you could help us answering it. And we would like to have your feedback on these webinars and know about your future plans. So take a minute to complete the poll that you see on your screens. Okay, thank you for your answers. Just as a final reminder, the recording of this webinar will be available on the GeneXus webinar site and on our YouTube channel. Remember to check our new GeneXus webinar site regularly for previews and for upcoming webinars. All content, as you already know, is free and 100% online. We hope to see you again next time. Be safe. Thank you, Juan. Thank you, Wilmar and Fabian. Bye-bye.
Bye.